If everyone is ready, I think we'll get started. We have, I think, some people on the stream already just waiting for us, running late on our schedule. But I think, I'm happy with the slower pace. Yes. So hi, everyone. My name's Amal Bisharat, and this panel is MENA Swana Theater in Schools and Universities. And I, for one, am very interested in this conversation. I've worked in school systems for a long time, and I just, there was an absence, So I'd love to, I think this conversation is really about what it looks like and what the future could be, the possibilities. So super excited. So I just want to go through and let you know about all the amazing people on our panel here. And I couldn't find my reading glasses, so I can read it. I made it kind of bigger. I cropped them tight. Okay, so to my immediate right is Malik Najjar, full professor of theater arts at the University of Oregon. He is author of Middle Eastern American Theater Communities, Cultures, and Creators, and also Arab American Drama, Film, and Performance, a Critical Study, 1908 to the Present. He edited Heather Rafo's Iraq plays, The Things That Can't Be Said, the selected works of Yusuf El-Gundi, and 4 Arab American plays, works by Layla Bak, Jamil Khoury, Yusuf El-Gundi, and I can't read.
Lamis Isaac.
Thank you, Lamis Isaac. Okay, yeah. Yes.
That's it.
Okay. Should I keep? Okay, good. Help me if I need. Okay. Where am I? He is co-editor of Mona Mansour, The Vagrant Trilogy with Hala. And 6 plays of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with Jamil Khoury and Corey Pond. Malik had the great pleasure of directing Hannah Khalil's Scenes from 71 Years for Golden Thread Productions on this very stage. Yes, I did not know that. I was here. It was amazing. Yes. Wow. And I loved the opening music. Actually, I recall it very well. Yes, it was Sans address. That. Yes, yeah. Great. But I just remember the intro music too. Yeah. It sticks with me. Okay. Amazing. Yeah, I know. It's the music. Okay. So, moving on to the right. Wait, I didn't put my slides in order of the way we're sitting. Okay, Hala Bhakti is a lecturer in the Theater and Dance Department at California Polytechnic, State University, San Luis Obispo. She earned her PhD in Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her research interests include Arab American theater, conditions of theatrical production, and diaspora theories. She has presented her work at IFTR, ASTR, and ATHE. She has published in Modern Drama, Theater Journal, Theater Topics, and Asian Theater Journal, as well as co-edited, well, we already talked about this, yes. Co-edited the Vagrant Trilogy, 3 plays by Mona Mansour. She is also a director and dramaturg whose recent credits include Yusuf El-Gundi's Wife of Headless Man, investigates her own disappearance, Mona Mansour's Unseen, and the devised ensemble play Writer's Block, and Kareem Fahmi's American Fast. Yes, okay. I apologize. I'm having trouble seeing. This is dumb. Okay, here we go. I know, does anyone have any reading glasses? Do you? Oh my God, that would be amazing. Or honestly, do people just want to read? Do people just? I'm sorry, I'm in that transition where I refuse to accept it. And I'm like.
It's coming. Here you go, yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh, okay. Oh, these aren't strong enough. Okay, let's try. Are they stronger?
Yeah, they're probably stronger because
I'm so sorry. I'm making this about me, my eyesight. Let's see.
Better?
No.
Never mind.
It's so specific. Okay.
Is there an optometrist in this?
This is good. Okay. Adam Ashraf As-Saih, did I say it right? Is an Egyptian writer. Oh no. Oh my gosh. This is embarrassing.
Double,
I'll try. Nope, I think these are these help. Whose are these? I mean, they do help. Thank you. Okay. I'll give these back to. What's that? Okay, great. These are great. They do help, actually. Okay. Adam, let's turn it back over to you. Is an Egyptian writer, theater maker, and dramaturg who writes and develops plays that interrogate the intersections of queerness, immigration, and colonialism. Adam's plays include Drowning in Cairo, Revelation Memorial, and Jamestown, Williamsburg. Have been developed and skip through it? No, okay. Have been developed and seen at New York Theater Workshop, the Lark, the Tisch School of the Arts, the LaGuardia Performing Arts Center, and Golden Thread Productions. Adam is a fellow at Georgetown University's Laboratory for Global Performance and an Alliance Candida, I should know how to pronounce that, award finalist. He holds a BA in theater, playwriting, and dramaturgy from NYU, Abu Dhabi, and an MFA in playwriting at Brooklyn. Yes. Can you finish it? At Brooklyn. Yes. Also a current PhD student. Yes. Thank you. All right. And Heather, we have. Let me pull this up. All right, Heather Rastovac Akbarzadeh. Yes. Is a community-engaged scholar, artist, and educator. She earned her PhD in performance study from UC Berkeley. At UC Berkeley and Stanford, Heather taught courses on performance in and from MENA communities. She is currently the program manager for Golden Thread's Theater for Young Audiences program, Fairy Tale Players, which tours original plays based on Middle Eastern folktales to Bay Area elementary schools and libraries. In January 2024, she will begin her new position as assistant professor in the Department of Dance at UC Riverside. Yes. All right. Payman Shams. Yes. Pronouns are he, him, his. He's a PhD candidate in theater arts at the University of Oregon. His journey began in Iran, where he earned a BA and an MA in dramatic literature. Later, he completed an MA in theater arts at the University of California, Santa Cruz. His research centers on the profound connection between Iranian theater and social and political issues. He's committed to bridging the gap between scholarship and the real-world impact of theater and eager to make a meaningful difference in the field. All right, let's give everyone a hand. Yeah. Yes. All right, so the main objective of this panel is really to explore how MENA theater makers and educators K-12 all the way up to university settings navigate questions of cultural competency, representation, and then also omission. Omission, that is. It considers all the ways in which students might engage with MENA Swana theater, such as in production, as in dramatic text, or in theater history lessons. So we'll start with just, I guess, if everyone wants to, I don't know, we can either, I can pose the question and we can kind of see who feels they want to speak most to it. Okay, so first question is, how do students encounter and engage with MENA theater, if at all?
Well, I'll say I never did. When I was a student in, middle school, high school, college, undergraduate, and even in my master's program, it really wasn't a topic. So by the time I worked on my PhD at UCLA, and having worked on many MENA plays by that point, I felt that just had to be my mission, if you will, was to focus on specifically Arab American theater, because that's my particular genre, but also Middle Eastern American theater. And I think that by just putting my mind towards that particular mission, if you will. I feel that that's where my intervention might be, is creating classes, publications, and productions at the university level in order to hopefully educate these students about a region that they really have usually very little consciousness of by the time they reach the university. And it's pretty shocking. I'll hand out a map on the first day of my Middle Eastern American theater class of the Middle East with no names on it. I'll say, just try to write down some of the countries. And on average, it's 2 to 3 answers from a class of juniors in a university. So I think that just is a great indication of where we're at right now in the educational system.
I can yes and that and say that even when the MENA region is represented, it's usually as a text and it rarely makes it to a production on campuses, and that's for a lot of reasons. But also that the text is very poorly explored if it's not taught by somebody who has the expertise. And so things are changing now. I think a lot more educators are making an effort to intervene into existing curricula and to include more MENA representation, but there's still a lot more that could be done to educate the educators and to educate students at the same time.
I always feel weird doing this when I'm with people on a panel, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I feel very lucky as a recipient of like the type of scholarship that because my experience is very different. One of the first texts I read, one of my first theater professors in college was Catherine Corey. And one of the first plays she assigned was by Yusuf. And it wasn't like this was our like token Arab American play or anything. It was just one of the plays we read that semester alongside Tony Kushner, alongside a lot of other writers. And and I studied with like Arab theater. I was able to read your scholarship and not think of it and not have that sense of precarity until much later in my education when I was pursuing my own research and scholarship and realizing how recent how recent much of that was, and also that like it is ultimately fairly scarce. Like I think about like scholarship as well as like when it comes to playwriting, and I initially started, and I think of myself still primarily as a practitioner and playwright, and I think probably part of what I will talk about is this binary of academic or scholar versus practitioner, and like bridging of those and rejecting that these binaries as separate. But part of the interest in continuing to pursue academia and scholarship for me was like just seeing how limited there was eventually. But I really do like as you say, there's a lot of education to continue to happen that needs to continue to happen for I'm sure I can speak less for K-12, but definitely for educators generally speaking. And I think much of it also comes to this lens of decolonizing the curriculum, or this idea. I think Perone also mentioned it in the earlier panel about like, we're gonna do a smattering of like, we're gonna have the East Asian week and then the Arab week and then this week. And I think I'm really interested in what it looks like to move beyond that type of thinking, just structurally, and yeah. And so, yeah.
So I'm going to reflect a little bit on being a student, a college student, and then teaching in the university, and then my position as program manager for the Theater for Young Audiences program of Golden Thread. So I did my bachelor's degree in Near Eastern Languages and Literature at University of Washington, and I graduated in 2008. I was interested in performance in a Near Eastern, Middle Eastern Studies program, and at that time, it's changed, fortunately, I think, in the recent past, but performance was, especially contemporary performance, was like alien. They were like, let's just think about literature from the 12th, 13th century, right? And partly because there were no advisors who could advise such a project at the time, right? And fortunately, that's changed with Nagme Samini in the program as lecturer and Seattle's robust theater scene. At UC Berkeley in the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies, though it was focused on performance, anything from MENA SWANA regions were never like really part of the graduate studies program curriculum, right? So then there was again, that sole person that was like looking for someone to advise me. So fortunately, I think that's changing with a lot of the junior scholars that we have here on the panel. And I did some teaching of undergraduates at Stanford and Berkeley, as my bio said. But having had experienced that lack of accessibility to MENA SWANA performance broadly, it's such a privilege to work for a program, a part of Golden Thread's Fairy Tale Players, that's bringing MENA theater to elementary schools, right? So here we are as adults being like, we never got access to that. Now, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds are getting access to that. And that speaks to the importance of the program. But obviously, there's a lot of challenges to not only are the young audiences that our program tours among, they're in public schools, the lack of funding for the arts continues to decrease. And so some of these kids have never seen a theater performance ever in their lives, let alone a MENA performance or theater performance. And so really the challenge is the sustainability of touring these shows to public schools and elementary schools and libraries in the area. That is really the key around the sustainability of such a program. But at the same time, in thinking about educating the educators, what's also, not to completely tout the horn of Fairy Tale Players, but one of the key components of our programming is to send dramaturgical materials to the educators that prepare themselves to be able to speak about the play, some of the historical, cultural components of the play. But again, the bandwidth of teachers is increasingly shorter and shorter these days. And so a lot of them don't end up getting to use those materials in their classroom. So yeah, that's a little bit of my experience.
Okay. I've been in the US like for 5 years now, and it's the first time I have a microphone, so I don't get used. So I don't have that much experience in the US, especially if you consider COVID time. It's not that much like. But basically, I would say you should be lucky to hear about Middle Eastern or MENA theater. For example, in my master program, I never heard of this term, but at UO, we have Malik there. So it's kind of depend on the instructor, faculty. It's not a part of the education, I would say. So I hope it changes.
That might happen a couple more times. I found all of that so fascinating, and I loved like the educating the educators, and also, even just like looking at, do people even know the countries, and also I just wanted to share about Fairy Tale Players. I had the opportunity to stage manage the rehearsals for the current, it's still touring, right? That Nasruddin's magnificent journey into Samarkand, yes. Yes, by Taranj. It's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing play. Oh my goodness. And afterwards the Q&A with the kids, it's really incredible, like watching Sarah, ask, the kids, they might not understand the cultural specificity, but they understand that Nasruddin is like a wise fool, and, if he's supposed to go this way, he will go this way, and he, it's just, it was really like I attended a couple of the performances, but I was just blown away by how much the kids actually got and understood. It just, there's no difference. It was really inspiring. I think it's amazing what Golden Thread does with that program. And then also, I just wanted to share about my experience in university. Like, I went to college in the Midwest. I grew up in Montana, and yeah, all the plays. It was like Our Town. I mean, it was just nothing. And then my experience directing K through 12 here in San Francisco, you know, I don't know, like my interest in telling Mina Swana stories was, you know, totally repressed in me for all those years. But people would come to me and want me to do Aladdin, and I would be like, no. Or like Peter Pan, like, no, I'm not doing it. So that was the only thing. It's like I really avoided the stories that were, you know, racist and sexist, or, you know. But yeah, there was not much I saw. So that was my experience, and I felt moved to share. Was there anything else that came up for other people, like based on what other people said, or? Yeah? Anything? Okay. Oh, yes, it seems.
Well, I'm sure we'll get to it.
Okay, maybe you can like weave it into the next. Okay, so next is, what are the parameters of cultural competency or authenticity in academic settings, particularly when it comes to production? Because those are the limits people face, right? I mean, yeah.
I guess we're doing this number. I guess. So I've noticed that I work with predominantly non-Middle Eastern faculty when it comes to theater specifically, and that's both inside and outside of academia. So I've noticed that when we set the tone for that desire for a research-based understanding of these cultures, things can go in that direction. And so even a costumer who's never costumed a Middle Eastern play will take on that mantle and take a deep dive and actually look into the actual costume history of the Middle East, or the actual types of textiles and different types of fabrics that might be used. So I think that the ability to create what we might call authentic, even though I'm not quite sure about that term, but the ability to create a more authentic, or at least a more research-based understanding of these plays through production is there. I think the problem is when you have a director that doesn't set that tone and says, we need minarets. We need, you know, those baggy pants, like I Dream of Jeannie. Like, you know, when you have a director that's literally talking in these Orientalist terms, you end up setting a tone for Orientalist productions. And the one thing I think that all of us might be able to bring to this, to the not just the classroom, but the stages of universities specifically, is hopefully the desire for and the expectation of making sure that these things are done properly, and that we don't generalize, and that we're very specific to the culture of the play or the playwright, and that we really make the effort when we're directing as well, even if we have to cross cultural cast, which is often the case, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that later, but is that we make choices as directors that do not lead into Orientalist tropes, and we bring in the cultural experts that we may need ourselves, because as much as we might know about our own particular cultures, we may need a lot of help with bringing in somebody to help us get those other cultural details correct. So I think that it just takes a tremendous amount of diligence that goes above and beyond directing Arthur Miller, for instance. And that's not to take anything away from Arthur Miller. You do need the same type of diligence in those plays. But because we're all so much versed in Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, we don't find the need to do that extra level of research that we must do if we're going to be producing Middle Eastern American works. And the onus is unfortunately more upon us than on somebody else, because we get it and we know it, and we therefore want to be true to it. And that becomes a real, I mean, that's the grist for the mill, the real work that has to be done that is necessary, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I thank you. I so agree with all of that. I do want to take a moment to d- distinguish authenticity from naturalism, because I feel like in the U.S. it's so often about naturalism, which I think actually very often hurts us because there are very few theater programs. I don't know if there's that like how many theater programs there are where there are 5 Middle Eastern actors or 5 Middle Eastern undergraduate acting students, and frankly, I like if there was, it would also still be complicated to like. Does that mean then that these are the 5 people that are going to be cast and no one else will? I think educational settings are inherently the idea is not perfection, and I think approaching. I'm gonna say this. I don't think it's rocket science. I feel like it really comes down to as you say, intentionality and a research. Like it's really not hard to find three films set in any Middle Eastern country in a specific decade, and to just go watch them for an undergraduate. It is about setting that tone, and it is also about then humility, which is I think like I. As I'm not a director, but as a playwright, as a dramaturg, acknowledging that if I'm dramaturging a play about Iran, I don't know the nuances of costuming of class in Iran in the early 2000s. You might not get it exactly right, but it's about the active effort of that and also bringing the right people into the space. And the process, to me, often working with students has been about, well, how do you even find the right person and what that looks like, and how do you then treat that person with from a lens of craft and not that their culture is what they're bringing to the table. And so to me, I just want to acknowledge that I think Samer Al-Sabr, who's one of my favorite practitioners and educators, talks about this a lot with how he approaches producing in the university setting and what this idea of intentionality versus naturalism or exactitude. And so, yeah.
I fully agree with what you both were saying, and I just wanted to also add to that I feel, at least in the spaces I've been in, that there's just as much priming to do in the audience and in the campus culture in order to receive these works. Yeah. And so it's not just about finding support in the colleagues in the department or talent among students or finding the right collaborators, but it's also about creating a conversation around it. So it's not just the production, but it's the whole campus community being in conversation with the production. And that I've found lacking in a lot of ways in different educational spaces I've been in.
So is this working? Okay. So I'm thinking, again, I'm kind of both between higher ed and then K through 12. I'll start with the K through 12 work with fairy tale players. I think it's a really special place in which fairy tale players lives in terms of Golden Thread Productions because of the fact that we have such a diverse range of resident artists that we can draw from as consultants, as collaborators, as folks that can add, the adequate amount of historical, cultural information that any given play may need. And so one example is our current production of Nasruddin's Magnificent Journey to Samarkand, follows Nasruddin Hoja through various cultures on the Silk Road, which in the text includes multiple languages: Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and Armenian. And in the glossary, we now have a digital version of our activity guide, and we were able to utilize resident artists to actually contribute that were native speakers of each word to our digital guide. So this effort, in a way, with Nasruddin's Magnificent Journey to Samarkand, it could be at risk of conflating the entire Middle East if you present a play that has multiple languages, but it's not given the context that this is a play with multiple languages. They're not all just the same, right? And so providing the digital guide with distinct delineation of which language and the pronunciations by our resident artists, for instance, has been really awesome. I think that's the challenge of MENA as a general category, right? Of thinking about, you know, MENA as a category, but all of the diversity within it is a tenuous line that we as educators contend with. And then in kind of my professional world as a artist and scholar, but I mean, I think for me, full disclosure, I am in dance theater and devised work. So this for me lends a certain ability to actually develop relationships with community members that become then part of the devising process, part of the even being on stage. So something you mentioned is like this idea of perfectionism. You know, I think when we think of production quality in my work, I'm bringing so-called amateurs or non-performers into this space to be part of the storytelling. And to me, that does a certain type of important work of decolonizing spaces, you know, blurring the line between like who belongs on a stage and who's in a community, right, that we have in higher education and certain art worlds. And so for me, that devised community engaged performance allows that. I can imagine, I'm not a director of dramatic text or a playwright, but I can imagine that becomes very, very tricky in terms of who's working on a production, right?
I actually, I mean, I had the honor of like working with Marina, where she's doing her PhD at Stanford on a new play development process for one of my plays this time last year, actually. And having had new 29-hour workshops or new play development workshops, primarily in off-Broadway theaters or off-Broadway theaters in New York, and then having this opportunity with a group of students who are primarily not acting students, who are PhD students across different fields, it was actually, I mean, it really speaks to what Raymond said earlier about this idea of the community theater versus professional theater, and how like that professional or commercial and how that like the arbitrariness and also like divisiveness that creates, because that was actually working with a group of people who don't like speak theater language, who don't speak like new play development language, and just say the thing like, oh, this just doesn't make sense to me. It's great. Like it actually like unlocked so many things in the play that had not worked for many past workshops. Yeah, I mean, I do, and I will say that as we think about larger theaters and the economies and infrastructures of the industry and the field, and how like many of them seem to be crumbling. I have found that new play development and universities are uniquely equipped with resources for new play development in a way that I have not experienced in many larger theaters and nationwide theaters. And shockingly, I found that the willingness and effort that initiatives from within higher ed institutions and within smaller theaters are, even when the resources or the technical craft is like something that you have to figure out sometimes, the intentionality is much more there, and feels there's a much less transactional element to it. Because a university, when you're developing your play at a major theater, there's a stress of like, am I gonna workshop this the way they want me to, and what is the transactional element and what might happen as a result. That added stakes or pressure feels different in a higher education institution, and the resources also that I have found, both as a guest artist in institutions and as a student and as a faculty member, that there are often resources that are not. I want to be clear that I don't mean like cash resources. I mean like space. I mean students who are really excited to be in your workshop. I mean printing scripts, which like sometimes ideas, which like sometimes feels so much more in the real world feels like as an early career artist is like things that actually keep me up at night sometimes.
Only thing I want to add is that, as our other friends said, sometimes the campus, universities, maybe students expect that because I'm from Iran, I need to know Arabic, Quran, everything. And of course, it's not my job to learn it. But I think my job as a scholar is to know the right people who could answer the question. So for example, if somebody come to me and ask a question, I don't know the answer, I know the person that knows the answer. So I think that's my job to know. And this is going to help us to have such a knowledge.
Brain trust, right?
It's right here. It's here. Okay, well, I know some people have been touching on, casting cross-culturally. So I'm just going to try to combine, like, the next two questions. Let's see. So how can students and, let's say, educators ethically engage MENA stories and characters in the classroom? And also, how do we contend with the pitfalls and politics of representation, such as cross-cultural casting and storytelling, looking at the limits of these spaces, who's in them, how do we do it?
We're in a really strange position because we would never cast August Wilson's plays with a non-black cast, but yet we do cast MENA plays with non-MENA students, so there's that. However, it's also not about DNA, as Adam had mentioned. If you have a MENA student who has really no connection to their heritage culture, it's not really helpful to cast them in a heritage role where you're expecting them to know the cultural specifics of that culture. So it really is an interesting conundrum. I think that two things come to mind. One, that university theaters are the new regional theaters in the sense that they don't often have the financial pressures on them that regional theaters have, so they're able to do more work that is outside the bounds. However, you also run into the opposite problem of casting. So if you're in a city like mine, Eugene, I don't have a lot of MENA students around that I can cast in these plays. So do I just not do the play, or do I cross-cultural cast? And I think I've fallen on the side of, in my particular situation, I cross-cultural cast, because it's actually more informative for students to interact with that culture in a way they never would. So when I directed Heather Raffo's brilliant play, 9 Parts of Desire, I had 9 non-MENA actresses. However, they had to don an abaya. They had to sing in Iraqi Arabic. And that was hugely interesting. And I think they all learned a lot from that experience. So I think universities themselves have strangely different conceits, and therefore we have to work within the boundaries that we have. That said, I've also heard playwrights tell professors, if you keep doing plays like this, you'll never get tenure. So there is this, not at my institution, but I've heard others say that. And so that is the other sort of Damocles hanging over your head, is tenure. So if I keep doing these plays, is that going to get me my tenure? Is that not going to get me my tenure? So these are the other problems that universities have specifically that you may not have, or you have in a different way outside of a university setting.
That's the silver lining of adjunct life, which is my life. I don't have to worry about tenure, but I do have to worry about getting rehired every year. I want to go back to what you were saying about earlier on the other question about universities. No, both of you were saying that universities are like uniquely positioned to become the new regional theaters, to support development, because universities are these like self-contained cities, right? And they have pockets of expertise in so many fields. And so, part of what is exciting about, the central mission being educational rather than producing something, is that hopefully give ourselves grace to make more mistakes and to approach everything from a curiosity-minded kind of perspective, right? That said, I feel like the universities, much like theater institutions, are also experiencing a crisis of sort of identity, right? Universities have become less tolerant in some cases of difference or of curiosity or of like saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And to a certain extent, that does clamp down on the creative possibilities that theater departments can embrace and what they can offer their students in terms of educational opportunities. So yeah, and like in my ideal world, I would love it to be not problematic to cross-culturally cast, as long as we can, as you said, dive into a story with integrity, with research, with good intention, and really approach it as a learning experience, not as a we're trying to get it right experience. Right. And I would love for theater departments to not be so insular or caught up in their own politics, as they in many cases are. Yes. To the point where they can collaborate with other departments and create better informed productions. So I would love to work with like a history department to do a play, if we were doing a play about Israel-Palestine, like let's talk about it from a multidisciplinary perspective. So yeah, things like that, those are kind of like my dreams and the pitfalls that I've experienced.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting to me that culture shift, which I think it's coming from a place of corrective. So I want to be clear. I'm not condemning or condoning anything, but I think that often silencing that I think you and I have had some offline conversations about this is coming from the students, and that to me is something I'm more cognizant of the idea that students, particularly students who likely have spent much of their high school time in high school, like in the pandemic on Zoom, have a sense of this is the way the thing should be. And I feel like I don't know about other people, but when I was 17 years old, I really didn't know what I was talking about, and also really thought I did, but also was put in situations that proved me wrong, and sometimes they are right, but there is this question of in this overcorrection of authenticity and the exact identity being the thing, or what can be said on a stage, or how to engage in care while because theater is about embodying things that are often harmful and what it means to do that in an educational setting. I am curious about, because how one does that, or how we correct for that overcorrection, and what that looks like among educators. And I think, to me, part of it is that going back to the original idea of we are going to make mistakes, and what does it mean to, because I also think of students as future colleagues. I've had the privilege of working with people who are my educators, and I imagine that some people I'm teaching will eventually work with me, and what it means to instill that culture of it's okay to make a mistake, and it doesn't mean you're a terrible person, or that you're irrevocably immoral, or a racist, or whatever. You can fuck up and we can move on. Am I allowed to say that? And we can work through it, and there's a corrective, and what it looks like to build an ensemble back up from there. And so I think that's I asked the question not having an answer, but I'm curious how other folks on
I'm not sure if I can answer directly to that, because the whole time I'm like, okay, what is my answer going to be? What is my answer going to be? So I'll get that out, and then maybe I'll get there. So two things come to mind for me. The first being in places like where I've studied in metropolitan cities where there are MENA, SWANA students on campus, the question, of course, comes down to what is it about the theater space that feels exclusionary to MENA students on campus. So for one, as a very brief anecdote, in 2010 when I did my graduate performance piece, I had a young Iranian woman who was practicing Muslim, and she was like, "Hey Heather, I can't change here. Like I can't just get naked in front of a bunch of other students," which is something that I took for granted and was something, you know, so it's a question of access, a question of outreach, and thinking beyond the student population of a theater department, right? Which is who I was typically working with. And then I was very lucky to work at UC Berkeley and Stanford's departments that, you know, are attempting or working, practicing this idea of blurring the divide between theory and practice. And so they ask their students to both be makers and thinkers, which, you know, for most of us are not separate things, right? But in how it's usually structured, and the culture of many theater departments are that way, and dance departments as well. And so they're being asked to actually get into the classroom. The actors, the dancers are asked to get into the classroom and to actually have these kind of seminar-style discussions that are historical, et cetera. And I think the mentioning, I think you said multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary is key. So when I teach my courses, I'm always drawing from, you know, a multiple of fields that actually address the topic of representation. Before we talk about any kind of performance from anywhere in the world, let's talk about these topics of representation, the politics of representation, and the politics of authenticity, and then we can move into our thinking about, like, now that we have this kind of theoretical foundation, then we can move forward with actually thinking about the work with that as a backdrop. And the last thing that I want to say too is actually my favorite class that I've taught is called Representations of the Middle East through Performance in Performance and Popular Media, Popular Culture, because really I think a lot of this has to also like involve a certain unlearning of like what it is, how identifying how and where have we learned what we think we know about the Middle East, right? And so undoing our Orientalism, undoing our ideas, and interrogating our so-called knowing, a la Edward Said, right? So, and it's really fun because I'll play Aladdin, the cartoon, and you know, these 19-year-olds are really sad because they really, really love Aladdin, and like, please don't make me have to think critically about Aladdin, but I love it. It's like childhood memories. And so how is it too that like the question I'm always like, how can we still have an affinity or affection for while still critically thinking? Like, I'm not asking you to like suddenly hate your childhood cartoon. Like, let's now like develop a new relationship to it, evolving relationship. It's always gonna be complicated, but so yeah, I think really for any kind of theater, you know, of the global South, et cetera, that, you know, how have we come to know about this part of the world? So that's an important question.
I'm not sure if I have enough experience to answer this kind of question, but I would ask another question. What's our expectation of theaters, representation of MENA theater in universities? My experience is that basically in both universities I've been, we have 3 production each year, season. One of them is basically classical Shakespeare, Greek tragedy. One of them are kind of popular, most entertainment, have a big audience, fun, which is great. And we have just one room in best case scenario for other minority theaters, like African Americans, Latinx, Native Americans, blah, 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 blah. So is there any room for us in this situation? I don't know.
I'll just add one other thing too, is that a lot of the students, even at places that aren't conservatory, like, you know, colleges for the arts, they're really they're really invested in the shows that are going to, you know, get them jobs, like in the long run, right? So is that going to be like a small, you know, like newly developed play from a MENA, you know, playwright, or is it going to be the mainstream, you know? And that's the other challenge, right? Of like, you know, trying to develop a new culture and within neoliberal institutions.
Yeah, I mean, at definitely at NYU, I definitely had both in my own time as a student and coming back as an instructor, as a TA. It is the first and second gen immigrant students and students of color are just as likely to push for, like, I really want to do Rent instead of a new play that is about something that's not Rent. I don't know.
Yeah, I call it the Hunger Games model of season selection. Drop a Latinx, drop a Middle Easterner, drop a Jewish playwright, you know, and just have them fight it out, and then the last one standing gets to have their play on the stage.
I do want to say that I really like your question, and I think even like the notion of the classical slot is what I'm so because I think thinking about like diversifying often happens in the classical slot, and what that means, I think we often think about what who is on stage more than what are the stories we are telling, and I think there's very token ideas of what does diversifying Shakespeare look like, which one version of is like you're doing Hamlet, and like Hamlet is Middle Eastern or Black or Asian, but then there's the other version where it's like, well, there are. I mean, we earlier had Hannah here who spoke about like, was Shakespeare actually an Arab poet, and like I don't know about all of you. I grew up reading Shakespeare in Arabic verse before I ever read it in English, and to me, like, what if that was the classical slot? Like, what would it look like to actually deal with the legacy of something like Shakespeare in a global perspective? And so I think there are a myriad solutions and a myriad ways of programming seasons and imagining like a portfolio of things happening in succession that like start to break at or to chip away at this idea of like the POC slot or the decolonizing the curriculum really simplistic version of like check items, but I don't know that there's actually initiative to do that. Is my, to be frank, like I when I sit with other or more senior faculty members in a lot of institutions, and I feel like there is a certain complacency in actually breaking at that status quo.
I don't know. Last I heard, Shakespeare's not an American playwright. So I don't know why he gets millions of dollars of funding when American playwrights in a room like this get no funding or little funding. Adam, you're a playwright who deserves more funding. So this is where, listen, I love Shakespeare. I've done Shakespeare. I've directed Shakespeare, acted it, blah, blah. I've taught it. Fine. Shakespeare's great. We love Shakespeare. Okay? Can we all agree on that? So please do not send hate mail to my office. However, in my opinion, I would rather see American playwrights who are struggling to get their plays on stages be funded than to keep reiterating Shakespeare, where sometimes they make it multicultural, but in the worst ways possible. Like, I saw a Shakespeare that took place in Baghdad during the war, and you had Uday and Kusei. Now, if anybody directed that play in this room, I'm sorry. But honestly, I feel that those plays do more harm than good because they reiterate the same Orientalist and Islamophobic and Arabophobic tropes. I think Shakespeare's already problematic. We don't need to see a black individual pillowing to death a white woman. We don't need to see a man beat a woman into submission in Taming of the Shrew. There are so many problematics in Shakespeare already, and now we're going to add another layer of problematics on top. So my plea to all of you, what's that? And then you think it's radical. Yeah. So it's my plea to everyone, perhaps one Shakespeare every once in a while, and start putting more American playwrights on the stage of all the diversity of American, I'm not just saying BIPOC people, I'm saying all American playwrights. Find that generosity in your heart to bring those people to the stage so that they can get paid royalties instead of Shakespeare, who's dead and really doesn't get royalty checks anyway. That's my plea. Thank you.
Oh, nice. Hello? All right, you're getting applause for that one. I think you got some support. Yeah. The people right. Yeah. No. Oh wow. Okay. Well, that's
Do you like too many donuts? Just cut down on the donuts, right?
well, I mean that's the thing is like people are creatures of habit, and then we like play into that. Like let's just give just do the same thing over and over. It worked. Why not? Like that's where the change. That's like. But I really believe like. Middle Eastern theater, the stories like they're human. They're the same. I think it only takes just being in the experience of it to realize it's a human story, So I guess we'll close with, this is actually a really challenging question. So if you feel like you don't have an answer, feel free to just add your closing thoughts, as well. But what do we do on campuses or in schools where there's a lack of diversity in the student bodies? What do we do?
I think we need to reach out to as many diverse communities on the campus as possible. Arab Student Association, Persian student associations, Jewish student associations. Reach out to these students and entice them to come and audition for the plays. I think that outreach is massively important. I think that we need to engage students on topics they're really interested in hearing about. But maybe the whole job doesn't rely on production as well. We need to be teaching and creating classes about MENA and SWANA theater. We need to be publishing more playwrights, get as many playwrights published as possible, please, because unless it's in a book, it's not of any value to academia. So get it in a book and put it on a library shelf somewhere, because that's when it becomes something of value. That's what I've learned being in academia myself. Let's really fight for having more positive representation, and offer your skills as a translator or as a dramaturg. Offer your skills as a reviewer. I know critics are often hated in the theater, but one of the reasons I think critics are hated by MENA communities or SWANA communities is because they're viewing our works through a very Eurocentric lens. So we need to be the ones to start reviewing works through our lenses. I think that's how we change the dynamic. It doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship. So the burden is, in my opinion, the burden is tremendously heavy on any BIPOC person in academia. However, it's a good burden to have because we can actually change the narrative. And that's what we have to fight for. Invite MENA playwrights to speak to your classes. Yusuf has been so generous speaking to so many of my classes over the years. The playwright multi-learner in Israel has spoken to my classes over Zoom. Even though it's 3 a.m. in Israel, he'll still speak to my classes every year if I ask him to. I mean, it's that kind of thing that just goes to show that we have tremendously dedicated people in these communities that want to help. So reach out to them and do whatever you can to be there, to be the guardrails against what I would call reckless theater productions.
Well said, well said. I want to touch on the point of outreach that you brought up. When outreach fails, and It often does,
It often
inevitably.
I'll agree.
I do think, this is me personally, I would continue to fight for productions and for inclusion in curricula, despite there not being the right people for it or the willingness at the time for it, because incremental change, as much as your particular campus is willing to accept or swallow, is still good, right? And so if you don't get a full production, get a reading. If you don't get a course approved that's like on MENA theater, then include it in a theater history course that is mostly European theater. It's these little incremental wins, and also working with colleagues to just change the conversation and change the narrative. And I think that's also just as much about like collegiality and sort of building a culture of collaboration, which ironically enough doesn't always come naturally to theater educators. So yeah, I think that's all very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a larger conversation about. I'm gonna try and say this very quickly about like how college is thought of in the United States. Like there was a daily podcast episode a few weeks ago about how among people of color and among people of working class upbringings, the belief that college is something that is beneficial, that people should pursue, and that has a value added element to it, has significantly dwindled in the last decade. And I think it does come down to this idea. I mean, where in Egypt, where I come from, college is like what you do to get a job, right? To get a specific job, and that's it. And I feel like in many, many, many parts of the world, it is that. And I think something that was really refreshing about going to college in the United States was that it really wasn't that. It was about community building. It was about skill building. It was about finding out who you are, that like very tenuous self-actual like idea. And I find that the appeal of theater, like so many people don't start college as theater majors and then become theater majors, is because it does that. And I think so often the rooms we create don't do that. And I think that's really what it does. Like I think when I think about the community building, you know what undergrads always come to? Food. Like do the theater mixer and get really nice samosas or like hummus. What I don't know, something. But my point is, I do think that what we have. We are actually, specifically directors, are like I think incredible facilitators of community building and space, and I really continue to believe that theater and educational spaces can do that. I also think that universities and academics, particularly people who are on tenure track and who have like some resources within the institution, the possibilities for programming and the possibilities for identifying funding to bring in a workshop, to bring in a guest lecturer, to bring in to potentially eventually publish an anthology of plays. I mean, there are many of you in this room whose classes I've spoken in and have shared PDFs with, and the plays have not necessarily ever been published. And I often think about this idea of like university presses supporting publishing of non-academic work, and how the numbers of that have so significantly decreased over the years. And so advocating for these things within I also think in the same way that like nonprofits are struggling, the industry of like academia is really economically being questioned in terms of like what it even can be and what it can support at this time. And I think academics have a say in that, and that's really exciting.
Kind of piggybacking a little bit, I think similar to kind of what a lot of BIPOC working class first gen students often think of the university, I think there's also a certain idea of what the theater is, right? So like at Berkeley, graduate students in most humanities departments teach the university-wide writing classes. So we would have performance studies, non-TAPS, TDPS, sorry, TAPS is Stanford, TDPS majors. And like halfway through, it was on the semester system, halfway through I would get a student who's majoring in engineering who would come and say, I actually want to be in the theater, right? Like, they're like, it's like this secret that they're disclosing to me, right? Yeah, and I'm like, look, you can do both. Like, and like the theater space has a wide array of technicians, right? So like you, if you know, engineering is your thing, there's ways that you can utilize those skills in the theater space. And so just expanding the idea of what happens in a theater, there's so many people who contribute various skills to the production. And then also there's also the minor. Hey, just minor in it. You don't have to major, but you can minor. And then, so yeah, expanding the idea of what is theater, what is performance, what happens in performance spaces. But also, my other thought is a little more cynical, to be honest. As I enter back into academia as an assistant professor, you know, the increasing neoliberalization, privatization of the university it plays a role in what is being produced in the university, whether it's knowledge production or actual practice. The tenure and review process is like crazy hard and is on a temporality that like it really affects what one can do. This is just imagining. I'm expecting that, but also like, let's get real. You know, the politics around MENA in the U.S. Like as these last few weeks. I mean, these are real politics that have real implication on people's real lives, professional lives. People who are not getting tenure, people who are being asked to resign if they take a particular political stance that they feel is ethically, they're ethically responsible to do. So there's a lot of real kind of professional and material lives at stake with like working with this theater, the type of work we do that unfortunately also impacts. And so I guess like what to do, it's like, well, burn down the neoliberal institution. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah. So yeah, that's just something that it definitely impacts the work.
Thank you. What to do? I think just the idea. Sometimes I think we shouldn't limit ourselves just to main stage and theaters or season of the theater production. Maybe sometimes we should go to the audience. For example, I know in my universities there never been a Middle Eastern or MENA theater production, but always, sometimes unfortunately, there's lots of stuff about Middle East problems. Also, lots of gathering, lots of conferences, other stuff. For example, last year, Women Life Freedom Movement in Iran, lots of gathering and conferences was held in campuses. Maybe you could go there, be part of that program, even if a short play, just a monologue. You don't need to that. Maybe we could familiar with the audience and let them know that we are. Maybe over time we can have more audiences from that occasions.
Yeah, that's right. And the last thing I wanted to add was just being in the space, being like us as MENA identified scholars, practitioners, like just being in the space is actually an intervention. And that's something that the institution is trying to grapple with. They're trying to figure out how to relate to us, and we're trying to figure out how to intervene. And so I think this is a very slow-moving train right there, but it's heading in the right direction, I hope. So just existence in the space is important.
Yeah, we can't change anything unless we're on the inside. And we've been on the outside for a very, very long time. So I think we need to be there in the room where it happens and make sure that change can even be possible.
All right, I think we're actually at time. I think that's a great place to end. Yeah? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, all. That was amazing. Enjoy your evenings, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.